Roger Madelin jointly leads the development of Canada Water, a 53-acre master plan development in Southwark. Previously, Roger was responsible for delivering Argent's 67-acre King's Cross development. Roger, you've often said, I think, that King's Cross would have taken much longer, or even may not have happened, if it wasn't for the Olympics and the boost that that gave to delivering new infrastructure. Is that the case?
I'm sure you remember the tragic, terrible fire in the King's Cross Underground, 87, I think, and 30 odd people tragically died. And as a result of that, the Fennel inquiry said that King's Cross Underground station needed to be expanded considerably and obviously upgraded, and all the wooden escalators removed. And that work was several hundreds of millions, and it started in the mid-90s, by which time the new route for the high-speed railway coming into London had been agreed, changed from coming in and under central London, to coming via Stratford and into St Pancras Station, and that required even greater expansion of the underground, including the Northern Ticket Hall. And of course, King's Cross Station, which had been sat there looking very sad since the green thing on the front, which was under a temporary planning permission that had run out several years before, was looking very dilapidated. So when you looked at the amount of work that needed to be done once the Channel Tunnel rail link coming in, the Northern Ticket Hall, King's Cross Station being upgraded, and obviously all of St Pancras, you were looking at many hundreds of millions. And work started on the undergrounds beyond the Fennel report to deal with Channel Tunnel railing. Channel Tunnel railing was not a definite goer when we were selected for the development partner at King's Cross in 2000. The first phase was underway, and I think that was a surprise to many in the Department for Transport. I think it was John Prescott kind of feeling a little bit put on by the French, who were taking the mickey out of the British for having a kind of cattle train coming from the Channel Tunnel through southeast England. So the first phase was underway, and the second phase we always felt was bound to happen, and sure enough, during 2000, it happened. Now, a lot of infrastructure works, as we know from Crossrail, do tend to overrun a bit. Costs were escalating, building massive stations underground and overground were proving quite complicated. And the Channel Tunnel rail link itself was financed, as we now know, by government-backed debt and government bonds. But it was always seen and sold as a private sector funded piece of infrastructure. And the government got found out in 2004, and it went on the public sector borrowing requirement. I don't know if you remember that. It took a long time for that to be found out, and allegedly Gordon Brown, when Chancellor, lost it, let's put it that way, lost it, and decided that things had to stop in terms of expenditure where they could. They stopped the work on the Northern Ticket Hall. King's Cross Station design work just stopped. John McCaslin's scheme, it wasn't going to be submitted for planning, and that's how it sat from early 2004 until July 2005, when we won the Olympics. And from the development of King's Cross, it was very difficult, because we had a master plan. We felt it was pretty good, deliverable in economically viable phases. But of course, if the King's Cross Station itself development was going to come later, or if the Northern Ticket Hall wasn't going to be there when we finished the first phase, how are we going to phase it? How are we going to allow for construction to happen to those? So we went through a whole process of what ifs with Camden and Peter Bishop and his team. But it was a very worrying time, thinking, could we ever really build great office buildings, in the south, and convince anyone that it was a great place to go to, with a hole in the ground and King's Cross Station, looking very dilapidated. And then, July the 6th, wasn't it? Suddenly, King's Cross becomes a centerpiece of our Olympic offer, King's Cross St Pancras. And we had been a bit cunning with LCR. We had arranged for the International Olympic Committee to be put in lovely new Land Rover Discoveries at Stratford and driven through the tunnel to come out of the ground on the railway lands and be driven through the railway lands and be shown, all of this work was underway. And of course, it was all going to be finished for the Olympics. We knew that if we hadn't won the Olympics, it was just going to sit there and be argued about. So winning the Olympics suddenly got everyone around the table, and how were we going to finish what had been started, and also to do King's Cross Station. The planning application hadn't even been put in, Peter, for that. So suddenly it was partnership, DfT, London Transport, London Underground, TfL, everyone round the table. Let's get this stuff done. Let's nine, didn't it? So I think out the Olympics, but there'll probably still be a hole in the ground where the Northern Ticket Hall is in King's Cross Station. I don't know, whether that would have been turned into the glorious station it is now. King's Cross development would have happened. I'm sure Barclay Homes would have, Barclay Group would have come back into the fray and bought a plot up north and done some housing. But it would have been a very different piecemeal. Here we go again, another bit of London, that could have been so great, just sold off and done in a piecemeal, mediocre way. Pretty important then, winning the Olympics, and let alone Stratford and East London. I did say if we don't win the Olympics, God help East London.
Both King's Cross and Canada Water are sort of exemplar opportunity areas, and opportunity areas have been key part of the London plan right since its inception. And the idea around high density development taking place in areas of good connectivity. Do you think opportunity areas have worked as mechanisms for city making?
Simple answer, yes. How much, I don't know. But if we all cast, those of us that have been lucky enough to have worked in architecture development in London for the last 20, 25 years, have all seen such a huge change. 25 years ago, the idea of high density anywhere in London was not really something that people agreed on, and it was whether it was the Urban Task Force and Lord Rogers, brilliant work. If you got an old copy on your shelf, just pretty common sense stuff, but common sense didn't seem to be around that much, did it, when you had conversations with all sorts of people in London. And it wasn't just developments like King's Cross, it was the whole of London, certainly central London, with great planning officers, from, obviously I knew Camden very well, but there was great stuff going on, or starting to go on in Southwark, as I now know, and the City of London, and Peter Rees. There were lots of very positive conversations about moving London from a decaying city, a city reducing in size, right until the mid 80s, wasn't it? To a really modern city, and the conversations turned from why should we allow that, to why not? Why not build tall buildings? Why not bring in great world-class architecture? Why not have amazing public realm? Why not think that people might come out and spend leisure time in central London? And there was a huge group of people. You won. I was lucky enough to be a small part, and it was a very, very exciting time. Now, the mayor, Ken Livingstone, came along just at the right time. Was it just his London plan? Was it just opportunity areas? Of course not, but it was all part of the kind of mood music that was pulling London, into the into the modern city times. And I think we've got much to be very proud of. And there's amazing stuff all over London that I still keep discovering, Peter. Like you were saying, on the lockdown, you get out on your bike, you just go half a mile off your normal route, and you go, blimey, where did that come from? That's a nice building. I'm certainly cycling, to Canada Water and going through places of London that I didn't really know. I knew the main roads, but I didn't know the back street. And there's some tremendous stuff has happened. But no one told me it was happening, Peter. I know your organisation showcased terrific stuff across London and has done for well over a decade. And you look through your publication every year and you go, oh, that looks nice, that looks nice, that looks nice. But then you kind of put it on the shelf. But when you physically see it, there is some extraordinarily good stuff in London.
But if you look at London over the last 20 years, I mean, historically, London has grown in sort of spurts. How do you think future generations are going to look back and judge what we have all done?
I think generally, well, I'm slightly more relaxed than most, including you, I think, Peter, about the proliferation of towers. I think most of them are pretty crap. Sadly, I think most of them will not provide good accommodation for living. Most of them are too many single aspect, too much glass, overheating. So I think that aspect will be looked back on as pretty stupid. I don't dislike the towers, the idea of towers themselves. I just think they should have been designed with a little bit more common sense. So where some of the planning issues about cross ventilation and overheating are now is going to result, I hope, in much better quality living space. But generally, I think that when you travel around London, yes, there are some rubbishy towers, but there's also some quite good ones. And I think around those towers generally has improved in terms of public realm and economic investment. And obviously people criticise the terrible phrase gentrification. I think generally it is economic investment that has happened in these areas, and by and large that is good. And yes, it could be better if there are a few more interventions to help the people left behind by it. But those people were probably left behind before anything happened in those areas, and the opportunity of that investment coming in should be captured. I think going forward we could do that a bit better, particularly with this crisis. We know there are going to be a significant minority of people severely affected economically, mentally, socially, and the expansion that happens, which I think very fast once social distancing is gone, must bring those people along in the new growth as much as we can. I think that's the real challenge. How can we structure economic investment to help the communities much more widely?
And how do you think then COVID-19 is likely to impact on our general views of city making? Because at the moment we are seeing, and probably will be, a continuing increase in home working, which looks as though it's supporting local, perhaps more suburban economies. And London's sort of polycentric nature seems to me ideally suited to maintaining hopefully a strong centre, but also being able to create more investment in our towns and indeed our villages. So does that put Canada Water in a particularly strong place, do you think, in a post-COVID environment?
Canada Water will be hugely successful because we were looking at all of the themes that have been accelerated as a result of this pandemic. Health and well-being was the driving force at Canada Water. What does that mean? Well, better air quality. We're connected to 120 acres of green space and water space. 50% of of the 53 acres is going to be public realm, and it was always going to be much greener. That's where we had over the past few years. The buildings generally are low to medium rise, much more vertical circulation opportunities, outdoor space, all the offices. And we've also got a very flexible planning permission that allows us to do more homes, more leisure, more culture, more education. But I think because of its accessibility, it will be a great workplace, and I think we'll get 4 million square feet of workspace there, and it will be very, very popular. It won't be 9 to 5. People won't be coming in, 5 days a week, 9 to 5. But that was happening anyway, Peter. But it will be a great place to come in for the times when you have to come into your workspace, and I think there is some real knee-jerk, almost selfish naivety going on with some businesses saying, "Oh, we're never going to have offices again." Well, cities, once social distancing has gone and it's a thing of the past, cities are going to come back big time, because we know, do the math, it's the only way to accommodate the growing population and the needs to service that population. Cities over thousands and thousands of years are the place where the serendipitous meetings, all the social interactions. And if you're under 35 or if you're under 25, like, goodness sake, you've got to meet young people, otherwise you're going to go completely mad. And 70% of people in most businesses are under 35, Peter. The average age for the first time buyers has now risen to 33. These people with leafy suburban 5-bedroom houses in Surrey with a study, saying that, we're never going to have an office building again. Who the blooming heck do they think they are? Now, fine, don't force people back if they're a bit frightened and the pandemic's not over and it might get worse, but it's going to come back with a bang. Cities are going to be buzzing, vibrant, real hives of activity and innovation, as long as London keeps itself open to international people, international talent, and international finance. And the offices that will be filled up will be businesses that you'd never heard of, Peter, 5 years ago, 5 minutes ago. Look at King's Cross. Google were in a garage when we started that. Facebook didn't exist. Twitter didn't exist. LinkedIn didn't exist. Apple was, don't know what Apple were doing. Maybe kind of like starting again with Steve Jobs. So the businesses at Canada Water in 5, 10, 15 years, you won't have heard of them, and they'll be massive.
Well, of course, NLA didn't exist when you started at King's Cross either, Roger. So it's been a pleasure taking that journey with you, and what a splendid development. Look forward to seeing Canada Water coming out of the ground in the next few years. So, Roger, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Peter. And of course, you need new offices as well, don't you? What better place than Canada Water?
We'll look into it, Roger. Thank you.
Toodaloo. Bye.